No other state makes such a concerted effort to indoctrinate its young in its own history, and there's no question that the effort accomplishes its end. Virginia's elite takes seriously and has taken seriously its responsibility to ensure that students learn the approved and appropriate version of its history. We'll show you in this slideshow, in this movie, how two textbooks, one first published in 1877 and the other in 1958, ensured that that happened. Both textbooks were designated as official and required statewide by the authority of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And both textbooks were associated with key moments in the Virginia elite's defense of racism. First, the years immediately after the rebellion fought to preserve slavery, and second, the years of the emerging freedom movement in the 1950s. Mary McGill's first book in Virginia history was Virginia's official history text for 4th and 5th graders from 1873 to around 1915. Cavalier Commonwealth, published in 1958 after almost 10 years of planning, taught Virginia history and government to high school students in the Commonwealth. Mary McGill lived in Winchester, Virginia at the beginning of the rebellion. War conditions forced her family to open their home to boarders, and in early 1863, those boarders were U.S. Army officers. Mary was so passionately supportive of the rebellion in arguments and letters to friends from out of town that ultimately U.S. Army officials, possibly General Robert Milroy himself, exiled her from Winchester as a risk to the United States administration of Winchester. McGill's ideas were unchanged in the early 1870s. She began a writing career with 2 novels, early expressions of the lost cause genre. Then came her immensely successful textbook, still required in schools by the Virginia State Board of Education for more than a decade after she died in 1899. These words are from her second novel. If there ever was pure patriotism, as earnest, honest conviction of right, it served the arms and inspired the hearts of the people of the South. And as for the women, as a mother clasps in her loving embrace her newborn child and rejoices in its perfection of life and limb, and that it is all her own, so did they love the cause in its new birth. As in all of McGill's writing, when she says the people of the South, she's referring only to white people. In 1950, the libertarian socialist writer George Orwell died. His novel, 1984, published 2 years earlier, has been the most widely read critique of totalitarian government control in the English language. Orwell based his novel on his knowledge of contemporary Nazis and Soviet Russians, as well as his own work in the BBC propaganda to British colonies. He probably didn't know much about the lost cause propaganda of the U.S. South, but in fact it was as all-encompassing and just as committed to organized cruelty as those others. And it happened that just as Orwell passed on, Virginia's Jim Crow elite was preparing to use state government power to propagandize the coming generations. To do so, Virginia's General Assembly created the Virginia History and Government Textbooks Commission. They were concerned that, quote, textbooks then available slighted Virginia's role in the founding of the nation and misrepresented its part in the Civil War. 60 years later, another liberal delegate from Northern Virginia described the commission as a political body established to maintain the values and beliefs of the segregated Old South. In his novel, Orwell had invented a brand new language, Newspeak, which was engineered to remove even the possibility of rebellious thoughts. The words by which such thoughts might be articulated were eliminated from the language. And that's the direction that Virginia's legislators went when they tried to ensure that next Virginia generations believed in the politically correct version of history. They tried to give Virginia students a limited and carefully selected set of ideas and vocabulary with which to think about Virginia's history, and especially slavery and the Civil War. How did Virginia's elite ensure that Virginia textbooks were engineered to remove the possibility of rebellious thoughts? Well, both McGill's book and Cavalier Commonwealth simply ignore vast parts of Virginia's life, especially, of course, the experience of Black Virginians. Black people are hardly mentioned in McGill's book and discussed only from an external white perspective in Cavalier Commonwealth. Most of Virginia's history is still there in these books. Only certain undesirable events, especially rebellions by the enslaved, would be omitted entirely. But every incident, every event is described from the established point of view. A student who was educated by one of these textbooks would know the places, the dates of most events of Virginia history, but would know them only by names and descriptions that assumed the elite agenda was true. Why did Virginia's legislators feel this need so urgently in 1950? The main job of Virginia politicians has always been to preserve the racial balance of power, which in turn keeps the rest of Virginia's economic and political system in place. They had fought for decades to establish their Jim Crow system by the beginning of the 20th century and continue to work hard over the next half century to keep it in place. But by 1950, that system was feeling some new and unprecedented threats. A key change, one we don't think about now, was the dying off of the veterans of the rebellion. For decades, those veterans had been the reliable props every time that a politician or school or any other public figure wanted to promote the lost cause ideology in the Jim Crow system. You bring these guys out, they stand there, they bring tears to the eye, and people have their loyalty to the lost cause strengthened. But the rebel vets had their last Virginia meeting planned for 1951. Soon they would be no more. At the same time the rebel veterans were dying off, Black Virginians were acting more effectively to win their rights. One example, the Virginia Teachers Association, representing Black teachers, since the late 1930s had been winning equal pay for Black teachers around the Commonwealth. Then in 1942, a sentence of death for a poor Black sharecropper down in the Martinsville area was challenged not only in Virginia, but across the nation, even at a rally at Madison Square Garden. Virginia still executed Odell Waller, but they felt the sting of external criticism for the first time in decades. Then in 1948, Oliver Hill, Virginia's leading civil rights lawyer and a black man, a close associate of Thurgood Marshall, who would soon be part of the cadre that would desegregate America's schools, at least de jure. Oliver Hill was elected to Richmond City Council, the first such election in 50 years. Nor was this black activism limited to Virginia. Across the nation, northern urban black communities pushed the National Democratic Party to take stronger pro-civil rights positions. And southern Democratic leaders who were white resisted. In 1948, Southern delegates to the Democratic Convention paraded on the floor behind a rebel flag to the sounds of Dixie. One member of the Virginia History and Government Textbook Commission, Garland Gray of Southside Virginia, would play a major role in white racial resistance in Virginia. He was selected by Virginia's political boss, Harry Flood Byrd Sr., to head a commission on responding to desegregation and to the Brown versus Board decision. Eventually, he became a major leader of massive resistance, Byrd's campaign to fight the Supreme Court. This was at about the same time that Cavalier Commonwealth was published. The commission was very much a hands-on body. The original author of Cavalier Commonwealth, a professor named Marvin Schlegel, was essentially fired after his first draft dissatisfied commission members, and another professor, William Hemphill, was brought in to complete a more politically correct textbook. The resulting books, according to Brent Tarter of the Virginia State Library, portrayed Virginia's white leaders in unfailing, flattering lights, its enslaved residents as happy and contented beneficiaries of benign masters, and its Indians as savage barbarians or primitive simpletons.